Leviathan news today is May 28th. Hope everybody had a good Memorial Day. And today we are going to talk about FIT21 and how it's a Psyop and will effectively end DeFi as we know it inside the US. So everybody has been slamming Gary Gensler for years for pursuing a politicized crusade against crypto while the chair of the SEC. Just a few days ago, crypto Twitter and a lot of people erupted with joy when the U.S. House passed the FIT21 bill, which would codify a new regime for crypto and see the primary regulator be transferred from the SEC to the CFTC. Unfortunately, almost actually nobody knows what that really means. Well, some people do. So a decade ago, similar laws were enshrined that pulled Forex trading under the CFTC, under the guise of limiting leverage for retail clients. And with this newfound power, then CFTC Commissioner Gary Gensler waged a war on pretty much every single international Forex shop, bringing enforcement actions and against a litany of foreign companies, and using the global power of the United States to effectively shut down all access to U.S. persons to trade foreign exchange, FX, in non-licensed exchanges. So let me just read you a short summary from a 12,000 post thread on Baby Pips, which is a FX forum. So we'll just run through this. We've been conned by Gary Gensler, the head of the CFTC. On another thread, I called Gensler a sneaky little weasel, and I stand by that description. Gensler set up a straw man, the 10-to-1 leverage limit, and we bravely attacked and destroyed that straw man, thinking it was the enemy. In 9,000 public comments to the CFTC, we battled against that 10-to-1 straw man, and we tore it to shreds. And we said, if you ram this 10-to-1 thing down our throats, we'll take our business offshore. And while Gary Gensler and his crew were saying, gotcha, you'll take 50-to-1, and you'll thank us for it. And by the way, like hell, you'll be taking your trading business offshore. The CFTC never intended to impose a 10-to-1 leverage limit on retail Forex in the United States. From the very beginning, their objective was 50-to-1, and they achieved their objective completely. The phony 10-to-1 proposed limit was so extreme that we were relieved when the CFTC relented, when they listened to the voice of the Forex community, when they set the leverage limit at 50-to-1. Instead, Gensler wrote the sheet music, and we sang the song. Have we been had or what? Many reasonable folks, including several on this forum, have pointed out the hazards of using too much leverage and have endorsed the new CFTC limit, which misses the point entirely. It is not the proper business of the government to regulate the way we live our lives. It is not the proper business of the government to tell us how many calories we may consume, or how much we may drink, or how much of our paychecks we may spend on lottery tickets, or how much Forex leverage we may use. And it's not the proper business of the U.S. government to tell residents, or it's not the business of the government to tell U.S. residents where they may do their banking or where they may do their trading. Finally, it's not the proper business of the government to tell U.S. Forex brokers where they may set up foreign branches or whom they may accept as customers in those foreign branches. It is appropriate for the government to require brokers to furnish full and honest disclosure of the risks involved in Forex trading, and to furnish full and honest disclosures of the terms and conditions of the trading accounts which they offer. And it is appropriate for the government to prosecute fraud wherever and whenever it occurs in any financial markets. Beyond that, the government has no legitimate role, and they should butt out. The CFTC has UX Forex traders and brokers by the throat. By threatening their ability to do business in the US, the CFTC can interfere with the rights of those brokers to do business outside the US. But the CFTC has no authority over foreign brokers who operate entirely outside the US. And under current law, the CFTC has no authority over individual traders who trade through foreign brokers that are beyond the reach of US regulation. The US government claims the authority through the IRS to require US residents to report foreign accounts which we hold, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, etc. But they cannot yet prevent us from having those accounts. The CFTC and their sock puppets, the NFA, are behaving like the rest of the nanny state. They're acting like our rulers rather than public servants. These people seem to believe that they have the right and the power to do anything they want to. They've never had that right, and they never will have it. They may have the power, but not for long. So this was written in 2010. and it's history rhyming. Switch the language above to DeFi, and it mirrors the threat we face today. The US is on the verge of passing FIT 21, the first and most expansive market operations bill for crypto in its existence. This legislation is riddled with contradictions and paradoxes, and it threatens to dismantle DeFi by imposing mandatory intermediation, carving out essential definitions, and leaving tokens in a legal state of limbo. Under the guise of regulation, FIT 21 introduces a labyrinth of legal traps and ambiguities designed to maintain traditional control and stifle the innovation of crypto, and specifically DeFi. Today, I've asked lawyer Alex Golubitsky to come on. We have talked with him at length about several of the issues that have come up with the CFTC over the past couple of years, and I'm really happy to have him here today. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure coming on.
So I would say that the FIT 21 bill is like out of the frying pan and into a scalding, boiling pot of oil that vaporizes you, and you really have no idea what's going on. I think that people just don't understand what it means to be regulated by the CFTC, and just the sheer crazy enforcement that has taken place before this. I mean, they really make the SEC look like a nice little Pomeranian that you come across the street that has some sharp teeth, but isn't really going to do any damage.
Well, they certainly, up until the crypto and digital assets, I think that people looked at like the CFTC crackdown on Forex, which I'm glad you read that forum post. I've certainly seen it circulated, and anybody was around on trading Forex during that time. It was a pretty big deal how the CFTC sort of just swooped in and said, this is our bailiwick now. And there's actually I think some technical similarities too around CFTC oversight of Forex and CFTC oversight on digital assets, which we can get into as well. But I think that the big deal with FIT 21 is kind of like the person was saying, right, in their post. We all, I think, can agree that rules about disclosure, enforcement of fraud, all that's good, right? I mean that should be something that the government does in whatever auspice. But like, if we're talking about a digital asset like market regulation bill, we don't need additional rules that empower either the CFTC or the SEC. They're plenty empowered, right? They go out there, they're doing what they want. They're going after the CFTC and the SEC. They're going after various different projects, and what we need, I think, from Congress are laws that delineate what the roles of these agencies are in a way that strips power from them, not in a way that grants them power. And I think that at a high level is the issue with FIT 21. And so I do think, though, I don't want to come on here and just talk a bunch of shit about FIT 21 because I think it is, like, in many respects, especially politically, a step in the right direction, right? Just to be talking about what is a market structure bill, going to look like. And there are concepts, even legal concepts within the bill itself that, if done correctly, I think would be very positive and would actually cause crypto to grow as an industry in the United States. So we should, I think, kind of what could we build on from the law, and so I think one of those legal concepts that the bill introduces that's like very important is coming up with like a legal definition of decentralization, which is something we sorely need in the United States. We talk about decentralization a lot. We've been talking about decentralization as a legal concept a lot, but there's not anybody out there who can tell you what it means to be technically decentralized from a regulatory standpoint in the US. So, creating, some rules to the road about that are good. And I think it's also good to create rules to the road around decentralized systems that say, for projects that meet this criteria of being decentralized, the CFTC and the SEC have to keep their hands off those projects because there's nothing to regulate. They're decentralized. So that's good. I think that's there conceptually in FIT 21. The problem is that the definition of decentralization is just a little bit murky, and it needs to be made more clear, specifically around front ends and access, right? And this is something that we know this is important because we've seen it, especially in CFTC enforcement actions, that when they come in, they're really targeting, who's operating the front end of this protocol. And one area where I think the FIT 21 falls short, that would be sort of like an easy fix from a technical perspective, is just a statement that running a front end that allows user access to a smart contract is not in and of itself something that can be regulated by the CFTC or the SEC, and is part of DeFi, right? That the government has to keep its hands off of. And it's otherwise, if we don't have that, then I think that a lot of the definition of decentralization that's in FIT 21 becomes a bit of window dressing, because, okay, great, if I operate a validator, I know I'm not going to be subject to regulation, or if I publish a smart contract, I'm not going to be subject to regulation. But like, nobody just does that, right? Nobody just like puts a smart contract out in the world and like walks away. People have to access it, and that's something that I think needs to realistically be assessed in terms of how that fits into the regulatory landscape. And it's not any more clear under FIT 21 than it is under the current rules, like how that activity is actually going to be treated in the US.
So let's take a look at a decentralized system, as they call it. So in the bill, they say that something is decentralized if over the past 12 months, nobody has had unilateral authority to control or significantly change the functionality of this system or restrict its use, software integration, participation in governance, or operation of computational infrastructure. That's point number one. And this is a 5-point system. Second point is that no one controls more than 20% of the digital assets, or could direct more than 20% of the voting power if used in a governance system, or if over the past 3 months, the issuer did not materially change the source code unless addressing vulnerabilities or agreed upon by decentralized governance. Point number 4 is that no issuer or affiliated person is marketed the digital asset as an investment. And the 5th one is that all distributions of the digital asset were to end users through the blockchain's functioning.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a definition, right? It's I think going to be very difficult for projects to actually like get to that point, which is maybe the point of including that definition in the bill. But and I understand, I think, a lot of what they're trying to get at, right? Which is that what the government's interest, and I think this is a legitimate interest of the government, is, okay, if people are going to be using token issuance to raise capital, and that token issuance is probably going to be a security in some way, just like any capital raising transaction. If you're going out to the public and saying, I want money from you, and I'm going to take that money, I'm going to do X, I'm going to build a business, whatever, and you're going to get returns on the money you give me, that's a capital raising transaction, and it's probably going to be rightfully going to be subject to regulation. And like where I think a big disconnect is in terms of how the crypto industry works and how regulators want to treat the crypto industry is like, we're not going to have another Bitcoin. We're not going to have another instance where people just kind of create a system for the hell of it, right? And then everybody who gets a token is participating in the system. Like it's just that's not happening. And so, I think that what the reality of our industry is that tokens are issued to raise capital, but those same tokens that are issued to raise capital can be used in governance and can also like fulfill the functions that are being described like within the sort of the definition of decentralization that you're describing. And so I will say a positive thing about this definition is that it recognizes that to an extent, right? So like there's this 12-month look back, right, where it's like, okay, how has this actually been functioning? So maybe there is a way to sort of like kind of like cleanse that securities taint, if you will, from a token and allow it to become a decentralized part of a decentralized system. So I think that that's sort of there, but
well, this seems to enshrine the speech that former Commissioner Bill Hinman gave about ETH at the time in this path to being sufficiently decentralized, saying that, it's perfectly fine to have token sale. It's perfectly fine to raise money, but there has to be a set of guidelines that allow a security to pass to a non-security through this magical thing called sufficient decentralization. And so what this bill does in the FIT 21 is it explicitly states what is necessary to be sufficiently decentralized. And
I mean, look, I think that there's blanks that are going to have to be filled in through regulations, but this part of FIT 21, I do think that there is a framework there, and I think what you have to be careful about is like the extent to which, and I'm probably going to say this a lot as we go over the bill, the extent to which, okay, there's like a blank spot here that's going to have to be filled in through regulations. It's going to be either the SEC or the CFTC that's filling in those regulatory gaps. And I don't necessarily, we need to be careful, Congress needs to be careful, the extent to which we're trusting those agencies, right? And so there's, this is one area where I think that the law is like directionally correct, but like, we probably need to bridle the executive agencies a little bit more in terms of what they can do, just because we've all lived through the last 10 years of crypto regulation. So like, we're not, you can't tell me, oh, we should just trust the SEC to do this right. Like Hinman's speech or not, like they haven't been acting in good faith. So when we're not coming at this, it's not all other things are equal situation from the perspective of the regulator. And I think that Congress sort of knows that, right? So a lot of this stuff, I think, needs to be have a little bit less latitude for what the regulatory agency, can actually do with the law.
Yeah, and I think the issue at hand is that because of this sufficient decentralization, it creates this bifurcation of digital assets. So if something is sufficiently decentralized, it becomes what's called a digital commodity. And we'll come back to that in a second. The other type is a restricted digital asset, which kind of fits into the SEC's purview. There's a kind of an idea of what this digital asset is before certification, during non-functional periods, and then after it's been issued. And so if you have a token sale and you're issuing, in this case, securities, it's perfectly fine to raise money. I think they set limits that you could raise up to 75 million in here. So it kind of sets a pathway to make token sales fully legal under the law, and to hopefully would onshore some capital that has been going offshore and bring it back into the U.S. And the other part is the digital commodity, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on. But digital commodity would be under CFTC regulation, and so you just sent that Miro board, which I also have up.
Yeah, I was hoping to like pass that along to the viewers and just make people aware of this resource that Sarah Brennan over at Delphi created. This took a ton of work on her behalf, and she put it together like relatively quickly. And so it's actually like quite germane to the point you were just raising. And I do also want to like get into the digital commodities and what that'll mean. And I think that's where a lot of the hair on this bill actually is. But the part, the capital raising part, the capital formation part, and the new exemptions and everything, that framework is, I think, there's a lot of meat there, and there's you know, a lot that kind of can be worked with. And so I just want to, this resource that Sarah created is really amazing, because it's a great, the bill itself is quite complicated, but this is a really great sort of visual distillation of like how it will work. And I do think that the exemption, the token exemption, is huge. I mean, that alone is a reason to have some optimism about what this bill is going to be, because it's really it's very, very necessary. And so I do think that that's you know, that exemption alone is worth exploring. And I don't know that like that saves the bill, because there's some issues around, again, getting back to like what it means to be decentralized, and what that certification process looks like, that could get a little bit messy under these rules. But the general idea that we need sort of a Reg CF style exemption for small, relatively small raises through tokens, it's long overdue, and that, I think, is a really positive part of this bill.
And then also additionally, it also enshrines airdrops into a like non-security status as well too.
Yeah. And again, just one of those areas that's been so murky for so long, it almost feels like manna from heaven to get clarification on it. And you know, and so that's all good, you know, that's all good. And but I do think that there are some other issues here, especially when you get into the with the CFTC regulated market, that sort of bottom left-hand quadrant. You know, again, Sarah, on this flow chart, what we were just discussing in terms of like the sort of decentralization stages is like very useful for how that works. The again, the certification of an asset as decentralized is a little bit convoluted, because, and I understand what they're trying to get at, right? What they're trying, if a system is truly decentralized, then who's gonna certify it, right? There shouldn't be a truly decentralized system, should not have an actor who can speak on behalf of the system and say, yes, I am applying for the certification. So on the one hand, it's good that anybody can kind of like go to the SEC and say, I am certifying this system as decentralized. But if the SEC says, no, we don't think it's decentralized, it's not at all clear like how that gets litigated, like who can step in at that point and say we think the SEC is wrong, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And so then, you know, I think it's important to look at like what happens after the capital formation stage, right? And so it's almost like this bill is really dividing you know, fundraising activities and putting those under the auspices of the SEC, which is correct, and then saying, okay, once you've used a token to raise funds, it can move out of the SEC's purview and into what? Well, now it's this thing called the digital commodity. And again, that's where I think a lot of the hair on this legislation is, because when you start talking about the digital commodity and the CFT, they're creating this new authority for the CFTC to regulate digital commodities. And one thing, if I had to pick one thing that's like my strongest, most severe criticism of this bill, and it harkens back, Sam, to what you were reading at the beginning of this episode, right, where we're talking about the Forex overreach and the problems with the CFTC as a regulator, is we need to be very careful before we just wholesale give the CFTC more power, right? We already did that with Dodd-Frank. We already with Dodd-Frank in 2010, we already said, hey, we have this disaster that crashed the entire economy with swaps being unregulated. So we need to figure out how to like move everything, all of this swap regulation under the CFTC. And what ended up happening is when Dodd-Frank gave the CFTC a lot more power than it had before. And I think that is what Fit 21 is doing. And I don't think it's intentional. And I think it really, we got to pump the brakes, because I think the unintended consequences from this are going to be fairly severe, which is that the F in the CFTC stands for futures. Right?
Yeah.
And so when what this law
the CFTC has never had spot market commodity jurisdiction or the ability to regulate spot commodity markets.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly. And when we're saying, hey, there's this new thing called digital commodities, and we're now giving spot authority to the CFTC. Now the CFTC, it's not 100% accurate to say the CFTC has never had regulatory authority over spot markets, because they do, but their authority over spot markets is limited to what is necessary to prevent fraud and abuse in the futures market. It's not a plenary like regulatory power over spot markets, which is what Fit 21 does give to the CFTC. And I think that it's a big issue when you combine it with the other sort of like legal aspect of a futures contract, right? Which one of the things that makes something a futures contract as opposed to a spot contract, right, is that it's a derivative, meaning that it's not a futures contract is not a trade that involves the underlying asset itself. It's a trade that's sort of about the underlying asset. So with physical commodities, this is very straightforward, right? If I go buy corn, this is a classic example, and I entered a contract with you that says you're going to deliver to me X number of barrels of corn, very clear that's not a derivative contract. That's not, even if it's happening in the future, even if you're saying in 4 weeks you're going to get the corn, like sure, that looks like that's something that's happening in the future, but it is an agreement about a physical object, right? So you don't have that with digital assets. They're intangible. If I send you an ETH right now, I'm just going to click a couple buttons on my computer. You're going to have the ETH. I'm not going to have the ETH anymore. And like that's that. But physically, nothing happened. And so,
so just to kind of clarify there, I can call my friend who's a farmer, grows corn, and say like, I want to buy 10,000 pounds of corn from you because I don't know, I'm making a corn palace and I need it, right? And we can enter into that agreement where he's going to sell me 10,000 pounds of corn and I'm going to pay him in the future. But that's not regulated by the CFTC.
correct.
Right? At what is the boundary at which this becomes a futures contract? It has to be a regulated product, right?
No, not at all. So like if you enter in that same agreement, right? You have your friend the farmer, and let's say the agreement is not that you're going to like purchase 10,000 pounds of corn and they will be delivered 10 weeks in the future. But let's say the agreement is if the price of corn 4 weeks from now is less than it is now, he will pay you the difference in the price of corn. And if it's more than it is now, you will pay him that difference in the price of corn. That's what makes it a futures contract, right? That's what makes it a derivative, is that we're still in, the corn can still exist, right? There's still physical corn in the world, but the agreement between you and your farmer friend is predicated not on the delivery of corn, but on the price of corn.
Got it.
And so that's what kind of makes it a derivative. But you can see, I think this example is really helpful because you can see, like in the context of digital assets, how there's just not that clear separation, right, between those two concepts, right? Because like if I, for whatever reason, right, let's say we had this same agreement about ETH, and I'm going to deliver you that we enter an agreement where I'm going to send you an ETH in 4 weeks, right, at an agreed upon price. Or we enter an agreement that I'm going to pay you or you're going to pay me in 4 weeks based on the comparison of the price of ETH then to the price of ETH now. the actual transacting of those two contracts looks basically the same on chain. And that's not really the case with the physical commodity. And so what has made the CFTC, I think, historically a somewhat awkward regulator of digital assets is they have really tried, not really tried, but they have tried, paid lip service to focusing on like leverage transactions and like futures transactions in crypto. But if you look at the CFTC enforcement action against Matcha last fall, which I think we've talked about on here before, what were they saying? They were saying you're a DEX, right? But we can still regulate you because the tokens that are being traded on your DEX are themselves symbolic of a futures transaction, right? Of a leverage transaction. And so, you know, the CFTC is clearly trying to like figure out, well, how do we like get authority to like just be the regulator of a digital marketplace? And like the fact that they have the authority granted in this bill is like highly problematic. And I'm not saying that because I hate the CFTC. I'm not a big fan of the CFTC. It is true. But a big part of how the regulatory structure of FIT 21 is put together is there are registration requirements for market participants that for doing like actions that you sort of see every day, right? Like the offering of a digital commodity for sale. Like that's something that you would have to register with the CFTC if you're doing it as a digital commodities broker. And so, okay, fine. But like the exception to that is unless I'm only dealing with somebody called an eligible contract participant, which is similar conceptually to like an accredited investor in the securities world.
So
somebody's got efficient assets, basically.
I just want to read something here
Sure.
that was published. It was actually shared by Gabe, and so I just wanted to read this paragraph here.
Mm-hmm.
So the intermediation of derivatives trading is a concept that is fundamental to the substantive regulation of commodity interests under the Commodity Exchange Act. For example, only certain market participants, known as eligible contract participants or ECPs, are permitted to enter into privately negotiated bilateral transactions that involve commodity interests. Or put differently, the CEA and related CFTC regulations require non-ECPs to enter into commodity interest transactions, including derivatives, through a regulated intermediary, which is called a futures commission merchant, and over a regulated exchange, which is called a futures exchange. In addition, the CEA mandates that certain types of commodity interests, certain interest rate swaps, be executed through a central trading facility, which is called a swap execution facility or futures exchange, and notwithstanding that both parties to trade may qualify as ECPs. And so based on that, I just want to bring up the dissent from Commissioner Messenger in the case of Open and Matcha, which was published a while back. So he writes that if the commission is going to require these DeFi protocols to register as designated contract markets or swap execution facilities, how can they satisfy the core principles that Congress has set out for such registrants in the Commodities Exchange Act? CFTC commissioners often tout the CEA's core principles for providing flexibility, but that flexibility is meaningless if our commission does not exercise it. So the thing that he's touching on here is that under the Commodities Exchange Act, there is a requirement of mandatory intermediation for non-ECPs. And I think that's what we're getting at the heart at. And so these digital commodities that are being named in the FIT 21 bill would require mandatory intermediation. But it's just not possible in DeFi based on how the CEA has been set up and what's required of quote unquote DAOs to come in and register as future commodity merchants.
Yeah. Yeah, really glad you highlighted all of that, especially with Gabe's description, of course, of the ECPs and FCMs is great, right? And like it, I think for people who most of the viewers of this are people who are like DeFi users, right? And I think we'll have a kind of intuitive understanding of like why mandatory intermediation is like at best adds needless friction to DeFi transaction, and at worst breaks the whole system. And so, I want to highlight how kind of Fit 21 is fucking this up, to be blunt, right? So there's no obviously corollary to FCM in the Fit 21. Why? Because we're giving the CFTC spot authority. So we don't care about futures now. We're just talking about this umbrella concept of a digital commodity broker. And a digital commodity broker is any person who offers for sale one or more digital commodities. So that's everything under the sun in DeFi. And so, okay, so what happens then? Well, now you're talking about fractured liquidity, because I have a choice if I want to have a platform that people can trade any type of digital asset on, right? One, I can allow everybody to transact, which means I have to have an intermediary, right? And what that looks like is going to vary a lot from platform to platform. Or I can say, boy, that sounds like a pain in the ass, and this doesn't really work with how I've designed my platform. I'm just going to create a walled garden for ECPs and like screen everybody else out. Okay, well, what does that imply, right? Well, you have to check now. Now you can't, if you have a walled garden, right, that means you got somebody checking IDs at the gate and making sure that you know who a person is and that they're actually an ECP. It's a pretty high threshold. I think it's like $1 million in assets.
I think it's $5 million in assets.
5 million. It's pretty high, right? It's you're not going to. A lot of people use DeFi who are not ECPs right now. Some do, some are. And so the result of that from like a market standpoint is like you will have within these walled gardens people who are trading with one another, that it's going to be very difficult for other market participants to sort of access those funds. And like you and I both know how this ends up looking in DeFi, right? That like you end up with like wrap tokens. There's people who don't care about the US who are just going to allow people to do whatever, and it's DeFi. So you can very easily, or sometimes more or less easily, create symbolic assets that reference assets that maybe are not traded in DeFi. So like, just like you have like synthetic stock, for example, or things like that in DeFi, you will have, I think we can all sort of see how this will work, that if so-and-so says, okay, I want to do my ECP gated DeFi protocol that does whatever, there's going to be leakage from that. And there's going to be massive arbitrage opportunities. And I think we don't really want DeFi to become just a platform for regulatory arbitrage. And I really worry that with this sort of mandatory intermediation setup that Fit 21 embodies, that's the course that we're going to be put on for DeFi. And I do think that that's like quite problematic. And I know a lot of people are rightfully pointing to, well, hey, there is this like, I think it's in section 6 or maybe section 5 of Fit 21. There is this carve out that says, notwithstanding anything else in this law, none of this applies to DeFi. Great. Okay. That's good, right? Conceptually, I like that. The problem is, how are we defining DeFi, right? And I think that is where what we were talking about, at the top of the show, where we really need to be a lot more careful about how we are including people operating front ends, right?
Or DAOs.
What's that?
Or DAOs as well.
Or DAO. Yeah, absolutely. How that gets wrapped into this wholesale DeFi exemption that we all want. And I understand like that there is like, I don't want to like just completely shit all over Fit 21, because I think,
well, I don't want to either, but I will say that the SEC has given us a lot of enforcement actions to go back and take a look at. I think there's been over 170 since in the past decade or so that they've brought. And so we kind of know how the SEC operates. We know what they're looking for. We kind of know what the argument is every single time. And there's a playbook for it from the legal side to go back and fight against these cases. From the CFTC, off the top of my head, there's been 4 UKIDAO, Open, Matcha, and Zero X or Daradex or whatever they wanted to call it.
Yeah. It was one that nobody actually used. Daradex, I think, is right.
Yeah, but let's talk about UKIDAO for a second, because I think that everyone has forgotten what exactly happened here and just how much of a absolute shit show it was.
Yeah.
Up and down. So back in 2023, the CFTC was granted a default judgment against UKIDAO, which apparently is a DAO, for violations of the Commodities Exchange Act, which we've been talking about. So they said that they engaged in unlawful off-exchange leveraged retail commodity transactions. They also engaged in
it was a specific allegation, just sort of tying it to the previous conversation. But
and so they also said that they engaged in activities that can only be lawfully performed by a registered FCM, Futures Commodity Merchant or Commission Merchant, and that they also failed to implement anti-money laundering and KYC procedures into the code that they had deployed. UKIDAO, I guess it's not surprisingly, the DAO itself failed to respond to the CFTC's complaint, and it also failed to appear in court for any scheduled hearings, which the judge described as strategic non-participation. And so they were fined. BZX/UKIDAO was shut down. There was damages that were levied against the DAO. They had to pay civil monetary penalties of around $650,000. They banned UKIDAO from any further violations of the CEA, and also ordered them to shut down as well, to shut down the website and remove its content from the internet.
Yep.
So notably, the court held that the DAO, the UKIDAO, is a person under the CEA and thus can be held liable. Right. And I think this is the crazy thing that came of it, is said that the people that just randomly voted for stuff, not the people that didn't vote, like if you just held the tokens and you didn't do anything, but the people that actually voted for the changes to be made in UKIDAO to enable this quote unquote illegal behavior, they were the ones liable. And there's a great podcast that you and I did, or that you did with Flywheel, well, gosh, it's almost 2 years ago now, where you talked about how the classification of a DAO as a person, and then also as a what was the technical term for the company? It was like
unincorporated association.
Unincorporated association opens an entire just mess, Pandora's box of litigation that could be brought against people that can be identified as persons inside the DAO who participated inside of governance.
No, it was that part of the decision was a huge mess, continues to be a huge mess. But one thing that you highlighted in the decision that I think is pretty critical, just in terms of how to think about it, is specifically, what did the CFTC ask the court to order? The CFTC never asked the court to order that the smart contracts themselves be shut down. The court can't order that. I think the CFTC knew that. What did it ask to order? It said order the website be taken down, which I don't know if that's happened, actually. I've not actually tried to go access UKI from the US. I assume that somebody somewhere along the line, whether it's the domain registrar or somebody further up, said, okay, we better listen to the court and take this down. And so I do think that really gets to one of the fundamental issues that we have to talk about when we're talking about a regulatory carve out for DeFi, right? Which is that DeFi is not, it doesn't just live in smart contracts, right? What makes DeFi is the ability for people to actually interact peer to peer. And we can't say that that interaction is only available to people who can program their own transactions in Python or whatever. If we're saying that DeFi exists to allow peer-to-peer transactions, and that's something that we want a regulatory carve out for, which is, I think, kind of implicitly acknowledged in FIT 21, but not accomplished, we have to talk explicitly about how users are going to access these decentralized systems. And the fact that I have to register a website, right? Somebody's got to be responsible for the content on a website just from like a domain registration, like ICANN sort of standpoint. I apologize for the background noise. That is not going, should not be enough to take a system out of being decentralized and being part of DeFi. And so that DeFi exception in the law, I love the attitude, I love the concept, but we need, and there's one even specific subsection in there that talks about access and I think that subsection should be bolstered, right? To say that not that this applies to websites, and that'd be one way to go about it, but the other way to go about it is to actually say that like everything, all the definitions we were talking about for like what the CFTC can regulate and who has to register, they all kind of turn around this idea of soliciting and accepting an offer, right, for a digital commodity, right? And I think that what would make Fit 21 1,000% stronger, that would be a relatively small change, is to say that simply operating a front end, simply operating a website is not soliciting and accepting an offer for a digital asset or digital commodity, however they want to phrase it. And that alone would cut the legs out of what the CFTC has been trying to do. Because what the CFTC tries to do is it goes to people and says, you operate a website, and by virtue of operating that website, you're accepting offers. And that gets to, I think, what the heart of the practical problem with CFTC regulation is.
And it ties in with the Forex conversation that we were having at the beginning, where you have these offshore exchanges that were offering services to U.S. customers, and CFTC went after them for essentially accepting them, right? For taking their money, onboarding them as clients, even though they had no footprint inside the United States. The simple fact of them allowing them to use their system essentially gave them full breadth to use the entire power of the United States government to close off those access points and then file enforcement actions against them. And I think the question is, if we see a repeat of that, of how the U.S. government essentially shut down access to all U.S. persons to Forex over the past 15 years, what does that look like when it's being applied to DeFi? And the legal mess of DAOs as unincorporated associations, or God knows what else, when it comes to liability and also personhood and all these other questions that we really just don't have answers for yet, I think it's just a massive what if the bill is passed in its current form.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I got to hop here shortly, but I think that what we're seeing, and maybe I think some people would probably criticize me as being a little bit too charitable here, but I think it's somewhat apt, at least, is to say Fit 21 is in many respects a step forward, right? The question is, if it's passed in its current form, it represents two steps backwards. And so I think that we have to sort of take the momentum, take the good things from Fit 21, take the fact that there seems to be some political consensus in Washington right now to like actually think through these problems, as opposed to just the plugging your fingers in your ear and screaming la 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 until crypto goes away. Like, I think DC starting to realize that's not going to really happen. So in that sense, it's a step forward. But what comes next, I think, is the real work of like getting all the stakeholders together who don't necessarily agree about what is workable, and coming up with something that's workable. And from my perspective, the most important thing, and I realize that's not everybody in digital assets and digital commodities, but from my perspective, the most important thing is protecting DeFi and allowing peer-to-peer transactions to continue in a permissionless, autonomous, and anonymous fashion.
Well, we'll wrap up the Fit 21 talk there. I just want to congratulate you and the MetalX guys for conducting your raise.
Oh, thanks, man. I really appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. We're super excited.
So you guys raised $2.7 million at a $27 million valuation. And this is to promote your Borg overthrow.
Yeah. We're going to make DAOs great again.
We should do a show about that, guys.
I would love to. Yeah, I might try to convince Gabe that he ought to come on and talk to you guys about Borgs. But
this can be a great episode. If it's possible, let's do it.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So hopefully I wasn't too doomer about everything.
No, I think if I can pat us on the back for a second, I think we were the right level of doomer. At least I think we both tried to highlight what some positive things are.
Well, great. Alex, thanks for being here today.
Thanks so much. I'll talk to you guys soon. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
I wonder, Alex, one last comment maybe on I joined a bit later, but now the Ethereum ETF, because it's probably a very long conversation, but on staked ETH, like now we have Ethereum ETF approved. What about staked ETH? Is that, what is your view on that? And
tons of problems, I think, with the staked ETH exchange traded product. It's a lot more complicated than just the ETH product, which makes, in a certain sense, the ETH ETF is a different kettle of fish than the Bitcoin ETF, I think, from that perspective, right? Because ETH is a more dynamic asset than Bitcoin. Not a criticism of Bitcoin, it's just the nature of the networks. And
it's going to be so funny, right? Because now you have ETH is a digital commodity, like grain or whatever. And then if you stake that commodity, you can earn a yield. So it's going to be very...
Does that then turn it into a security? And then was it a security to begin with? Then it's quite complicated. The politics around the ETH ETF are, I think, like quite messy, but
step in the right direction.
Head in the right direction. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a very good direction, and I'm very happy that it's not that like Bitcoin was everywhere in the media, the Bitcoin ETF, etc. Right? But this is kind of a little bit lower key. I like it. It seems more organic, and we can actually build real decentralized infrastructure here.
100%. Yeah. And I think that there is a danger with the Bitcoin ETF, or not just the ETF, but just any use case of Bitcoin that's off of the Bitcoin network, even just wrap Bitcoin on Ethereum. It does sort of call into question the functionality of the Bitcoin network in a way that having an ETH exchange traded product just sort of doesn't, right? I don't feel like the ETH ETF is going to be any kind of existential threat to DeFi. People are still going to have a real reason to custody their own ETH and use their own ETH. And so it's, I think it's just on the whole, just a very positive development.
Great to hear. Okay, well, thanks for being here. We won't take up any more your time, and we will be back tomorrow. We are going to have on GammaSwap to come talk about some brand new tech that they've been deploying. So really excited for that.
Awesome.
And then also on Thursday, we're having Matt from Gauntlet come. So it's going to be fun as well, too. Make sure to subscribe to Leviathan News, Leviathan_news on Twitter and Telegram, and we will be back tomorrow.
And on Substack, Sam.
And on Substack as well, too. Leviathan News on Substack. All right.